Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 119. Baseball is underway. We've got spring training going on the professional side of things, the college game, high school seasons are rocking and rolling, and it's actually led to some great questions that we're going to use for this month's Q&A. We're going to attack a few different kind of aspects of baseball development and managing baseball players that I think are vitally important to discuss, particularly at this time of year. So hopefully there's a little bit of something for everyone in this episode. Before we get to today's show, I want to quickly give you a heads up that registration is now open for our 2022 CSP Collegiate Elite Baseball Development Program. This event takes place at our Hudson, Massachusetts facility and runs from June 6th, 2022 through August 12th. This will be the sixth year we've run the program, and each year we've had pitchers move to Massachusetts from all over the country and abroad. This summer, we anticipate another awesome collection of motivated athletes who'll push each other to get better in conjunction with the same training opportunities and expertise we provide to our professional athletes. This program is a great fit for pitchers who need to prioritize development over just getting innings or exposure. In other words, it's a suitable replacement for those who still need to throw, but also need to do things like gain 20 pounds, learn a new pitch, sort out aches and pains, or improve their mobility. We've even had some post-surgical athletes who have come and participated in the program as part of their return to throwing program. Each athlete will begin with a thorough initial assessment on both the movement and the pitching side of things that'll set the stage for individualized strength conditioning and throwing programs. We do speed and power testing utilizing our Proteus motion device, and we integrate that in the assessment process and track it periodically throughout the summer to make sure that progress is being tracked consistently on an objective measure. Your individualized programs will correspond to 6 days a week of training. Generally, of the 6 days per week are double sessions with throwing in the morning and strength conditioning in the afternoons. In our throwing programs, we integrate things like weighted ball work, long toss, bullpens, video analysis. We'll use detailed TrackMan breakdowns and high-speed camera work in these bullpens as well. Pitchers also have the opportunities to throw live to hitters, and we've historically placed quite a few arms in the prestigious Cape Cod Baseball League late in the summer in light of some of the improvements they've made. We've also had several athletes over the years who have been drafted following participation in this program. It's really a perfect fit for a college freshman right after his first year at school. All athletes receive manual therapy with our licensed massage therapist or physical therapist, as well as nutritional guidance throughout the program. We also have recovery initiatives like Mark Pro and Normatec available to athletes if they choose to participate in those. And last but not least, we incorporate regular educational components for athletes on the why behind the training. Previously this is, consists not just of staff presentations, but also calls and in-person meetings with major league players and established coaches from around the country. And the best part is that it'll take place in a really motivating environment where athletes can push each other to be the best they can be. And we optimize the situation so that you can help change the person. We've seen some great results in this, and it's one of my favorite things that we do each year. If you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to us at CSPMass, that's CSPMass at gmail.com. Again, this program runs from June 6th through August 12th. It's a 10-week program, and you can learn more by reaching out to CSPMass at gmail.com. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states, on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where Athletic Greens can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. And that's why I use it daily and recommend it to our athletes. One scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multimineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. They work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid in digestion, recovery, and supporting of a healthy immune system. This all can happen without taking multiple products. While most nutritional products come to market and stay stagnant, Athletic Greens continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing 53 improvements over the last decade. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best daily nutritional habit on the planet. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. They put 75 ingredients through the NSF for Sport certification to come up with a formula that's trusted by some of the world's best athletes, including our own. Right now, Athletic Greens is giving our listeners 10 free travel packets with their subscription. Simply go to athleticgreens.com/Cressey to receive my offer. These travel packs are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health when you're traveling for games, training, or simply when you're on the go. They can be a great counterbalance to less than ideal on-the-road food options. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance to get nutrient diversity, then head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and get your 10 free travel packets today. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY. All right, we're going to get this going with some Q&A that I've received actually over the past couple months. It's been a little while since we've done an actual Q&A on this podcast, so I've stockpiled some different content. The first question is, now that we're into the in-season period, are there particular strategies that you feel are extra important to prioritize with your players across all levels? So I think this is a really, really good question, and it's obviously one that's a little bit loaded and maybe hard to unpack. So I actually took some time just to gather my thoughts on some of my, really key points that I wanted to stress. So I came up with 6 of them. And then the first one I would say is, from an in-season standpoint, you want to utilize a high-low model. And, this is challenging at the professional level, where guys may play 200 games in 230 days from spring training all the way into the postseason. But it's actually a lot easier to, employ at the college and the high school levels when, athletes may play, maybe they have busy weekends where they'll play a couple games and maybe a couple during the midweek period as well. But for the most part, you're not going to see a whole lot of college players that are ever playing more than 5 games a week. You might see, 3 over the course of a weekend and then, 1 midweek game. So I like the idea of trying to consolidate stress wherever possible. This is particularly important. We're talking about pitchers who are throwing on 5, 6, or 7-day, rotations. And I'll show maybe I'll describe the bad way that we've historically seen things done. So talking about pitchers on a 5-day rotation, and we know is that a lot of pitchers really struggle going from high school and college on a 7-day rotation, integrating to the 5-day rotation that we see in professional baseball here in the U.S. and even some of the the pitchers from the Far East who come over to pitch, in America, where they're going from a once a week outing to a 5-day rotation. They tend to struggle with this, and they kind of have to learn how to pitch at 90%. So in these situations, we've seen professional organizations try like a 6-day rotation. We've seen scenarios where they piggyback, where they might have 2 different starting pitchers. One goes 5 and one goes 4 in a 9-inning game. We've seen scenarios where players come into professional baseball and they just go 2 or 3 innings just as they get adjusted to this rotation. But one of the things I think that's really overlooked is what else is taking place as a stressor. So in the context of the overall picture, it's the rest of the throwing program beyond just the game appearance. It's also what's happening from a strength and conditioning standpoint. And a classic model that we've seen on a 5-day rotation is on day 0. That's the day of the start. So somebody goes out and throws 90 pitches. They come out of the game. And then day 1, they usually play catch, or some don't play catch at all. But a lot of them will do like a heavy lower body lift. And some may do like a distance run or something like that, historically. Day 2 is a very common bullpen day. It's probably the most common bullpen day you'll see in baseball. And I tend to be more in favor of a day 3 pen for reasons I'll outline in a second here. But often on day 2, it's basically it's a bullpen as well as like an upper body lift, or they may run some gassers, do some agility stuff, something or other. And then day 3, in many cases, like, if there wasn't an upper body lift on day 2, you'll see it on day 3. A lot of players will use this as kind of like an aggressive sprinting / gasser day. There's a high volume of work. And then we have day 4 to basically recover. Guys may play light catch. They may do some easy sprints, just kind of wake up the nervous system a little bit so they can be ready to pitch again on day 5. And the problem that I've always seen with this model is that we see people really dig the hole deep over the course of day 0, 1, 2, and 3, that one day may not be enough for them to kind of super compensate to come back where they need to. And we've had a lot of success with consolidating stressors into a high-low model by trying to figure out, it's either day 1 or day 2 is going to be a low-key day for you. So if it's someone on a day 2 bullpen schedule, there's a couple options. You can either lift immediately post game, do an abbreviated one on day 0. Day 1 becomes super low key, and day 2, is a consolidated bullpen slash, total body lift. So basically day 0 and day 2 are your high stress days, and day 2 and day 4 are your low stress days prior to your next outing. Or those individuals can basically, pitch on day 0, have a nice low key day 1, with manual therapy, low key cardio, just move around, feel good. And then on days 2 and 3, they consolidate a bunch of work, and the hole isn't quite so dig going into that day 4 where they're trying to get ready for another start. So the point is simply that, there's a high-low model in place, and this is why I like a day 3 bullpen for more athletes. I think it's higher quality work. It kind of shortens the learning loop, going into the next start as well, as long as guys don't, get over their skis and push too hard in that pen. But I also like it because day 0 to day 1 is kind of like a high stress day. They can get in a good challenging, lift the day after their start. Day 2 is all about feeling good. And then day 3 is a bullpen and another lift. And then there's, different things that we can mix in terms of, sprint and change of direction stuff and all that. But, the take home point is that regardless of what you're doing, you need to have hills and valleys in your overall weekly training, setup. And where people get into trouble is that they don't appreciate that games, especially high level competition, big time velo, running the bases aggressively, all that stuff, that's a high stress. So we need to find some time to, do the opposite. And then, sometimes when we add stress, it's best just to consolidate things and put them all in the same place. So that's the first one. The second thing I would tell you about in-season training that I think is vitally important to consider is that training sessions aren't just about lifting. I think we see athletes, they're hanging, they're not necessarily interested in going in because they're afraid they're not going to PR on a deadlift or something like that. What we have to appreciate is that, we're also going to the gym to do some self-myofascial release, to go through a solid mobility warm up, to maybe train, along that like strength speed end of the force velocity curve. We're going to throw the med balls a little bit. We're going to do a whole bunch of different things that are going to deliver, various physiological adaptations that we're seeking, right? So we don't just lift for the sake of getting strong. We also, move weights because it has a beneficial, effect from our endocrine system, for our immune system. There's a lot of benefits, with respect to glucose tolerance and how we handle sugar and things along those lines. So we're trying to impact an entire system, not just the neuromuscular system. So I always say, when you look at some of the most accomplished lifters on the planet, you'd be shocked at how many 4 and 5 out of 10 caliber lifts they've had, right? It's not that they're just going in and PRing all the time. Instead, sometimes they're just checking boxes. They're showing up, they're getting in some assistance work, they're going through full ranges of motion at joints, maybe they're just trying to move a lighter weight faster. What we know is that strength is actually really, really easy to hold on to. That's one of the biggest things that I'm surprised about. Is my powerlifting career is kind of come to an end in 2007, but I still enjoy lifting heavy stuff. Is that, well, it's pretty hard to build appreciable strength once you're at a higher level relative to your body weight. It's actually remarkably easy to hold on to it. So lifting heavy as little as once a month can often get the job done. What actually detrains the fastest is power. And I think where we see a lot of athletes get into trouble in a game like baseball is, if you have a day where you go 0 for 4 and all you're doing is walking back to the dugout because you've struck out every time, you might actually not run that much in a given day. So I do think it's important that we use the weight room not just to train strength, but sometimes just doing 2 sets of aggressive medicine ball throws or some box jumps or something to that effect, even some resisted sled sprints. Those things can all be really, really impactful on training power, which tends to detrain the fastest. But above all else, remember, training sessions are not just about lifting. They're about impacting a number of different physiological systems, and you can't just write it off because you're tired and don't feel like lifting. A third point, you've really got to maintain body weight. When I see people who struggle in season, it's because weight falls off, the quickest. So, as much as a scale is not a useful inclusion for a lot of people in kind of the body composition realm who are trying to, make favorable changes in that regard, I do think for competitive athletes that monitoring body weight is really important. I encourage a lot of athletes to weigh in on almost everyday basis because it's a good way to monitor hydration status, whether there's a general trend going in the wrong direction. Those things can be really, really important. I think this is particularly important with position players who are on their feet every day, just because we have seen over the years a lot of athletes who almost become desensitized to the fact that they're getting lighter, because in many cases they're actually getting faster. So their absolute power may actually be dropping, but from a relative standpoint, they do feel better. We know that baseball is a sport that's kind of a combination of both absolute and relative power. You have to do a little bit in both contexts. So just being cognizant of what your body weight's doing, how it relates to overall strength and speed levels, are really important considerations. Next consideration is just remember that sessions don't need to be long. I think people would be surprised when they look at what happens at the major league level. A lot of the position players we see out there are doing, 20 to 30 minute sessions a week. We'll see some athletes that like to do like one longer session each week. Usually those are the guys that are, a lot bigger, stronger, and stiffer. Are more hypermobile athletes. I've actually met players who felt like doing something almost every day was a big helper for them. So just enough to kind of create a little bit of motor control in an otherwise loose joint was something that really, really helped them. And then one final point is just appreciate when eccentric exercise is good and when it isn't, right? So there are going to be times when you want to do new exercises that may make athletes sore. So in those situations, in many cases, we're going to go lower volume. Maybe we're going to do like almost like an introduction week deload where the load's a little bit lighter. We might do like, one set on everything just to get them exposed to it, but not make them crazy sore. And then we'll actually, do a little bit more volume in the subsequent sessions on those exercises over the course of the, 3 to 5 weeks that follow. But, in the context of eccentric exercise, if you roll out an aggressive glute ham raise initiative in season, you're going to see a whole lot of really, really sore hamstrings. You do like a lot of, long duration, single leg RDLs and stuff like that. You're gonna make some hamstrings really, really cranky. So I think it's vitally important if you're going to have a strong eccentric component to your training programs. You got to introduce those things, in the off season, in the in season, and maybe not take them out just because we know when we bring them back, we are going to create a pretty significant level of soreness that's going to interfere with how athletes feel and how they perform. But there'll also be times when maybe we do more isometric stuff. We may do more purely concentric stuff, things like, trap bar deadlifts and, step ups. Those tend to be very, concentric dominant. Obviously, things like med ball throws and sled pushes tend to be purely concentric as well. So just understand that eccentric exercise, may be better for some than for others. And then, an additional point that, wasn't on my initial list, but I think is vitally important is just understand what an athlete's window of adaptation is. So these in-season training strategies are going to be remarkably different for a 34-year-old, middle infielder in the big leagues than they are for a 14-year-old kid. The 14-year-old kid has a huge window of adaptation ahead of him. He needs to make sure that he's crushing it. Biggest mistake I see in high school athletes is detraining during the season and losing a lot of the gains that they made in the off season. Whereas a lot of like higher level athletes can pull back substantially more, and they have, for lack of a better term, they have enough muscle memory to fall back on. They've held onto that strength. They've established those neural patterns, and they're also playing regularly, so they're exposed to more, sprint volume and things like that the younger athletes may actually detrain quickly. So I can't overstate enough that sometimes the answer is to forget that it's in season and just train. We've seen really good results with this, actually, with a lot of our junior and senior athletes in high school, kids who may have early releases or almost like study halls during the day where they can come and train in the middle of the day with us. They're able to get in a little bit higher volume of training during the season than they otherwise would. And sure enough, they're able to continue making a lot of progress during the season at a time where historically you thought you really needed to pull back on it. And even just, being around professional baseball players for an extended period of time, I've seen actually a fair amount of pro guys who can continue to get stronger, guys whose force plate numbers improve throughout the season. Obviously we can see velocity, tick up for various reasons, but I do think it's intriguing that even at the highest level, we do see some athletes who are able to get stronger, particularly when we look at a lot of like the high school draft picks in professional baseball. They're kids that missed out on a college strength and conditioning experience, but they can continue to get some really high quality, work in. So at the end of the day, lots of different things you can do from an in-season training strategy standpoint. These are the ones that are most, high priority to me. But just remember, we're trying to build a robust, durable athlete in season. The most important thing that we can do is have a really good off season to build a really good foundation. That base is going to be what sustains you, what protects you as you're faced with a lot more sport-specific demands. So, the more bold you are with your off season, the better progress you make there. The more you can probably get away with coasting a little bit on the in-season side of things. If you haven't built a really good foundation, though, you're kind of going to be swimming upstream once the season gets going. Our second question is, college baseball injuries seem to be up early in the season, particularly among high-profile arms. What are some of the biggest mistakes you're seeing that you think contribute to these increased injury rates in the college game today? This is a good question, but not completely out of left field. We actually had a really good podcast with Dr. Christopher Camp. I can't remember what number it is right off the top of my head, but we looked at quite a bit of detail about injury trends in professional baseball. And what's interesting is a lot of the arm injuries that we're seeing at the big league level, and again this is pre-pandemic, so separate the last couple of years out, they tended to stabilize quite a bit. And what was really intriguing though was that the minor league injury rates were going sky high. And your minor leaguers obviously tend to be younger than your big leaguers, and certainly a lot of those minor leaguers that are getting injured are really just the same age as college players, right? They're high school kids that may be getting to pro ball and breaking. And what I think is a really important discussion on this is part of this bigger discussion of a long-term change in the actual structural adaptations in baseball players. Guys are broken younger than they ever have been before, right? There's no such thing as a normal elbow or shoulder MRI in someone who's throwing 90 miles an hour at age 18. It just does not happen anymore. They all have stress reactions or partial UCLs in their history with, commensurate, calcification on the ligament. We just see crazy adaptations in these athletes at young ages because they're being pushed to specialize, because the game is moving faster than it ever has at younger ages. There's more strength and conditioning available to them. There's more technology to optimize mechanics. There's more, outcome measures like velocity, spin rate, all these different things nowadays that are pushing, skeletally immature athletes to go harder and harder and harder, early in their career. Just looking back, Cressey Sports Performance was founded in 2007. Back in 2007, it was a huge deal. If you were an 88 to 90 mile an hour left-handed pitcher, you were probably a top 3 rounder, regardless of where you played or the competition you were against. Conversely, 3 or 4 years ago, I can distinctly remember having 5 93 to 95 mile per hour left-handed pitchers who were free agents in independent ball who were struggling to get jobs in affiliated ball. So the velocity in the game has trended in such a crazy direction that it blows me away. Tyler Beatty was our first round pick. That was back in 2011. Tyler was 93 to 96 in his last high school start. He went 21st overall in that year. This year in February, we already have a high school kid who's throwing over 100. So the velocities have changed substantially over the course of time. And I think we just need to be mindful of the implications from a pure structural standpoint. So college baseball injuries are going up just like minor league baseball injuries are going up because a lot of players are too good too young. So right now sports medicine is trying to keep up. So all the more reason for us to be cautious with how we manage athletes. We need to encourage multi-sport participation. We need to encourage hills and valleys in terms of how athletes manage their competitive calendar, so that they're not just throwing full tilt off the mound all the time, but instead there has to be a level of progression to it. So guys are broken younger than ever before, and then second, obviously, velocity is bigger than ever before, and it's just pure physics that the harder you throw, the more your injury risk is accentuated. And we also know that taller, heavier athletes do tend to throw harder. So there's probably a fair amount of natural selection that's in play with respect to like this velocity discussion. Third, workload is still an issue. We know that really at the end of the day, there are only a few things that we always know predict injuries. We had Ben Hansen on a previous podcast, and he made a really compelling point that when we look at mechanics, everyone wants to say they know what mechanics predict injury. The truth is we don't. We know that mechanics, there are certain things that predict performance, but injuries are incredibly multifactorial, and we haven't really nailed that home. But we do know that there are a few things that always seem to predict injury. One is being weak. Rotator cuff strength tests, things like that, generally tend to predict injury pretty well. We know that there are some studies that show that certain range of motion issues can predict injury. Some good research that shows that if your shoulder flexion is limited on your throwing side compared to your non-throwing side, your risk of elbow injury goes up significantly. The whole idea of glenohumeral internal rotation deficit predicting injury has kind of gone by the wayside, but there's a little bit more evidence to suggest that limited shoulder external rotation makes you susceptible to certain things, particularly subscapularis injuries. But the big factor that predicts injury in every single study that's ever been done is overuse. So clearly, like the workload side of the equation is still an issue. Nationwide, there's more pitch count guidelines at the high school level. That has not been, really carried out particularly well in college baseball. I think we saw some pretty noteworthy and egregious, violations of what we would consider acceptable pitch counts last year in the NCAA postseason. So there are times when winning is put ahead of health, and there's obviously we can debate whether that's right or wrong at that age. It's certainly a very different discussion if we're talking about Major League Baseball players who are being paid a lot of money in the postseason, who are pushing and pushing and pushing to try to win games. I think the college game's a little bit challenging where, sometimes you have a kid who's a senior who might not be playing baseball after school, and he goes out and throws 130 pitches, and people don't really get concerned about it. Whereas if it's a freshman who's got a career as a first rounder ahead of him, it's a little bit more of a problematic discussion. So I do think workload is a big consideration. And beyond just the workload we see, on TV, we don't know how many, basically guys are getting up and getting hot and then not going into games. On the reliever side of things, we don't really know a whole lot about what's going on the rest of their week aside from, what's happening in that Saturday night game. So, but all that aside, for me, the biggest issue has always been the start and stop nature of the college game. It's just a huge challenge. So using just the competitive calendar as an example, it's really not hard to appreciate what's going on. So let's basically say that a kid goes into college as a freshman. He arrives on campus in late August, goes right into fall ball, so ramps up. Basically, especially if you're in a cold weather climate, it might only go until late October. A lot of guys will be shut down for a period of time to kind of work on what they need to work on. They may start to get ramped back up in early December. Tricky time to ramp people up because they've got final exams for the semester, and then they go home. So there's a little bit of a blind nature to it where college pitching coaches are hoping all their players are getting their work in over the course of time, and they may come back a week or two into January, and some of them are really advanced and have gotten all their work in. Some of them maybe aren't where they need to be. Some of them are working through some mechanical stuff on their own. So there's a short runway to get people ready for the start of games in February. Certainly there's a lot more control over what's happening during the college season, as they work their way through that. And then, obviously things wrap up in May or June, depending on how good the team is. And then they kind of go all over the place, right? Some of them may shut down and, because their workload is really high. Some of them may go to the middle of nowhere to play in a summer league. Some may go to a really prestigious, Cape Cod baseball league. Some may go to, private facilities like ours to, put on 25 pounds or learn a new pitch in like our college summer program. But there's a blind nature to a big chunk of the year. And, something like that wraps up and all of a sudden it's the end of July and players are, they're trying to decide, do I shut down and get a little bit of a break before I go back for fall ball? Is it the kind of thing where I should just continue to like idle it throughout the course of time? But, from a college pitching coach, I'm concerned that one of the biggest challenges that I'm wrestling with is the blind nature of our year. There are a lot of times throughout the year where I get surprised, right? I get surprised when they come back to campus after whatever they've done in the summer. I get surprised, when they come back from winter break, after I've sent them home and I'm not really sure if they've done their work. You always want to avoid those periods of time. And so what we also know is that there's a lot more discussions going into like this acute chronic modeling. It's probably perfectly, visualized and appreciated during a competitive season. It gets a lot muddier when players scatter to go all over the place, and some may be playing in Virginia, some may be in Alaska, some may be in Hawaii. They just kind of go all over the country. And as a college pitching coach, it's a very challenging thing because I'm a big believer that people in those roles are much more managers than they are just pure pitching coaches. So the nature of the stop and start calendar in the college game, I always tell people you're better off just continuing to throw than you are taking 10 days off and then starting back up. Shut down, ramp up. It just messes this acute chronic model up, really flips people on their heads. I know a lot of Major League Baseball players who feel awful right after the All-Star break, just because those 4 or 5 days off kill. They'll go on vacation, but they'll make sure they play catch on the beach or do something just to keep it moving. Heck, I know a lot of baseball players who don't like to take off days. They'll go into the stadium and they'll throw just on their day off because it's not just habit forming. They like to keep their arm moving, and I think they're acutely aware of how that acute chronic model is so important to their success. So, if we want to make the college game better, I think it's all about finding, ways to avoid being surprised and not having shut down, ramp up. We have to have, a real appreciation for, what our overall workload is over the entire competitive year. And being honest, this is also how development, generally is best. If you look at, the nature of our college summer program, while we've had a lot of good results in this realm, is we kind of control all the variables. We know how the lifting and the pitch design work, the bullpens, the sprint work, the nutrition, the manual therapy, how all those pieces fit together, how the synergy is in play. And it just gives you continuity. And you contrast that with a situation where folks may go and play in a summer league. They're not sure if they're going to be a starter or a reliever. They don't know what kind of routine they're going to be on. They don't know if there's going to be a gym within 30 minutes of their host family. They don't know what kind of food they're going to have at their fingertips. They don't know if the athletic trainer that's going to be with their team in the summer, if there even is one, is going to be able to do a little bit of soft tissue work with them the day after they start. There's just so many variables that are uncontrolled. And when we talk about development, it's all about having a clear, consistent path, consistent messaging, and an understanding of, how to go out and get the work done that someone's just kind of laying out for you. So I think that's why we've had some success, but indirectly it relates to why I think injuries are going sky high. Summarily, guys are broken younger than ever before. Velocity is bigger than ever before. Workload is still an issue. And then fourth, and most significantly, the start-stop nature of the college game is always going to be a challenge. And the most successful coaches that I know who have kept the most athletes healthy are the ones that understand how to, kind of manipulate that for the better, so that they give people the most continuity in their development. We interrupt this episode with a quick reminder that this podcast is brought to you by Athletic Greens. It's an NSF certified all-in-one superfood supplement with 75 whole food sourced ingredients designed to support your body's nutritional needs. I use this product daily, and a ton of our athletes do as well. Head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and claim my special offer today for 10 free travel packs with your first purchase. I'd encourage you to give it a shot too, especially because of this great offer and because it gives you peace of mind knowing that you're covering all your nutritional bases. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY, to get that special offer. Now, for our third and final question, what are your go-to strategies for righting the ship when a pitcher's velocity is down in season? This is actually a pretty timely question given that it's March and there are still quite a few players who are in season, particularly in the college and high school ranks, in cold weather, right? So we see a lot of, I know in Massachusetts, the high school season starts on the third Monday in March, and usually the first couple weeks is throwing off turf mounds in gymnasiums and or shoveling snow off baseball fields outside. But you see a lot of teams in the Midwest, Northeast who are actually playing games in pretty cold weather climates. So you do see a lot of velo that isn't where it needs to be early in the season. But I think anytime a pitcher's velocity is down relative to their norm, well, the first thing you have to do is be diagnostic. You have to understand, are they actually hurt? So digging deep on some of this stuff, you'll certainly see people that actually present with pain or just soft tissue limitations where they feel tight. You may see everything, from there all the way to more extreme, swelling in the arm, discoloration, which might be indicative of something like a thoracic outlet. So you have to run the entire gamut of what could potentially be wrong from an actual injury standpoint. But I think you also have to maybe backtrack it just a little bit to, ask, are there components of acute fatigue? In other words, was there a big jump in workload, right? Is this a pitcher who went from throwing 30 pitch pens to making, 60 or 70 pitch starts? Is there something about their workload that's gone up considerably where, they're just exhausted? This could also be sleep quality challenges. We know there's some really compelling research that shows that injury rates tend to go sky high during final exam time in college athletes. We have to be mindful of, like, if they're not recovering on the back end, it's going to lead to subsequent performances that aren't where they need to be. Reductions in body weight are always a big one. We mentioned, that in response to an earlier question, which could also be indicative of, hydration status beyond just losses in muscle mass. So one more reason to monitor body weight closely and make sure that, athletes aren't getting too dehydrated. But with all these things in mind, one of my favorite strategies in a young population, so we're talking, 22 and younger, is to simply tell guys to take 3 days off from throwing/training, eat every healthy food in sight, and then get to bed before 10 p.m. each night. It's a pretty quick and easy strategy to kind of just test to see if there's some component of acute fatigue. So you try to optimize as much as you possibly can and just see if these athletes recharge. Because a lot of the time, the fatigue is what's masking their actual fitness. And we know you never want to take a fitness solution to a fatigue problem. Acute fatigue and this strategy, out of the way, I think the second thing we have to look at is, how are they different from what they were when they were going good? In other words, is the delivery different? Have there been losses to range of motion? Are they detraining the weight room where their strength isn't where it needs to be? Were there adjustments to the throwing program? Maybe they were big long toss guys and they've pulled back on it. Maybe the weather hasn't been conducive to going out and really stretching it out, so they're just doing a lot of weighted ball stuff against the wall. You can also look at outcome measures, spin characteristics on Rapsodo, TrackMan, Hawkeye, whatever you've got. If a spin efficiency has gone down, it's a sign that maybe you're cutting the baseball, and it could be secondary to how you're actually imparting force at your hand, or how your delivery earlier on is setting your arm up to not eventually impart force to that baseball the way that you want to. So you always have to compare where you are to where you've been when you're at your best, and just appreciate that those are vitally important considerations for trying to reestablish it. It's a lot easier to get back to what you were than it is to try to discover it the first time around. So always look back and try to figure out ways that you can build on your successes. And I think it's really important to appreciate that this is where a good athletic trainer, good strength and conditioning coaches who maybe know your body, they found that you lost 15 degrees of elbow extension, or you're just not moving the same weights that you were in the weight room. And I can't tell you how many times on the young side of things where we've seen high school age athletes who are kind of doing the summer travel ball circuit, and the velo's starting to go down, and they come back home for a 10 to 14 day stint in the middle of the summer. They eat some good home cooking at home. They sleep in their own bed, and they get this like recharge, and then they go out and the velo jumps not long after that. Seen it over and over again, and you just have to be mindful of like very, very few kids underage 20, 21 consistently repeat their mechanics. So you can't put too much pressure on them, but you can certainly look for when they're at their best and try to reverse engineer things. Third, appreciate that extrinsic factors can influence things. If you're pitching on a turf mound as opposed to a dirt mound, the velocity's typically going to be much lower on a turf mound. Obviously, you compare apples and oranges if you're throwing to hitters versus not throwing to hitters. Generally, velo tends to tick up when there's a competitive landscape. Especially if you're throwing in front of fans, throwing in front of scouts, velocity will go up. But likewise, I've seen some terrible outdoor mounds where even the best cleats couldn't, outdo just how bad the dirt is and all that. I think, another extrinsic factor that you have to appreciate is a new catcher. If you're not comfortable throwing to someone who can actually receive it, there's a tentative nature to what's going on. And then finally, weather conditions certainly play into it. When it's 40 degrees out and your hand's freezing cold, it's not going to be an ideal situation to really optimize your velocity. So you have to appreciate all these different things. And then last, but certainly not least, you have to ask whether the overall schedule is just a problem. What we see very commonly in pitchers, that are shifted back and forth between starting and relieving is they just can't get into a good routine. They can't find that groove, that allows for a consistent throwing and training schedule, really ideal pre-pitching routine, just because they're always, trying to find the perfect time to get their work in while at the same time being fresh if, the team needs them to do something completely different than what they're anticipating. So I think, all these, signs point to how do we just get back to a consistent environment, right? How do we normalize our fatigue status? How do we hydrate? How do we get our body weight where it needs to be? How do we get on the throwing program, the lifting, and conditioning programs that are, are ideal for us? And certainly how do we get comfortable with a catcher, comfortable with the mounds that we're on? And this just speaks to this concept of, very rarely are circumstances perfect. Things are more perfect in the big leagues when, you travel, first class, and, you have great food waiting for you. You stay at nice hotels, you pitch on elite mounds that are perfectly manicured, and you do so to, some of the best receivers on the planet with, a game plan that's been meticulously scrutinized by a number of different people so you can feel very, very confident in your preparation. As we work down to lower levels, high school, college kids don't have all of those variables that are just really optimized. It's no different than, major league infielder, taking balls on a, ground balls on a perfectly manicured field compared to, some of the high school fields that have got, gravel and rocks everywhere. So just appreciate that you can't put too much pressure on yourself. There are going to be, hills and valleys in the context of your pitching velocity, but the longer you're at it, the more these things kind of tend to smooth themselves out. So that covers our 3 questions for this go round. By all means, if you have additional questions that you'd like covered in a future podcast, we'd be happy to answer those questions. So just reach out via the contact info we provide, the base of each of the podcast blogs, and we'd love to have a dialogue with you and help you dictate the direction that we take with this show. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Elite Baseball Development Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.